Is the deep state trying to engineer a civil war in America? Sure looks like it. Stay tuned and I'll tell you more. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Behind the Deep State. I'm your host, Alex Newman, senior editor at the New American Magazine. It sure looks to me like the deep state is propagandizing and priming the American people for a brutal civil war. All you got to do is look at the fake media to see what I'm talking about. The establishment propaganda machine is pumping out endless amounts of propaganda. In fact, 2022 was just packed with propaganda suggesting that civil war was just around the corner. They're even conveniently telling us what it's going to look like. According to the fake media, the Civil War will be rural, white, conservative, Christian Americans angry about losing their country to this wonderful, multi-ethnic, liberal, city-dwelling blob that is basically going to be the new rulers of America. And so that is all, they say, going to cause a civil war between these factions. It'll basically be the federal government and the city dwellers against the rural farmers and ranchers and grumpy old white Christian people who don't like their country changing so much, is how they're putting it. And people are being riled up on this big time, folks. And I mean big time. The government's propaganda machine, right? PBS, NPR, of course, government-funded propaganda. They are ratcheting up the hysteria about this civil war. I want to show you just some clips from PBS, one of the fakest of all the fake news networks. Here they are promoting this notion of a civil war. Check it out.
How far along that timeline toward a civil war is the United States?
So how close is America to a civil war? That's what the clown working for the federal government, pretending to be a news guy, wants to know. And his guest, Barbara Walter, an expert on civil wars, has the answer. Check it out.
We've seen a significant rise in violent extremism since 2008. Some of it's been on the left, but the vast majority of it has been on the far right. And it's been perpetrated almost exclusively by white men. And again, if you look at the history of the United States, the group that had been dominant since the very inception of our country were white men. They also tended to be Christian, and they are losing that position. It's no longer guaranteed that you're going to get into the best schools or get the best jobs or have economic security your whole life. Suddenly, there's a lot of competition out there, and you see a subset of this population becoming increasingly resentful, angry, and they truly feel that this is their country and that they're being patriots by saving what they believe is the true identity of this country, and they're willing to use violence to do it.
Okay, got it. It's white men, white Christian men that are mad at the fundamental transformation of the country. They're the ones who are going to use violence and so on to retaliate against this plan. Now, don't think that this isn't happening all across the board. I want to show you a video. We've actually used it before here on Behind the Deep State, probably a year or two ago now. It's a young man of African ancestry, and he is talking about how nefarious forces are coming in and trying to basically encourage young Black Americans to be used as cannon fodder in a civil war against white Americans, right? And he actually identifies, he says that this is being stirred up by the Clintons and George Soros, that they want to use these young Black men as cannon fodder in a civil war against Americans of European ancestry. A very wise young man here in terms of what he has identified as happening. I want to show you this little clip. It comes from a 10-minute excerpt. If you get a chance, go watch the whole thing. But listen to what this young man, his name is Shaziel Sons, has to say.
The left is going against the right. It's a huge civil war that's being planned out. I want to make this simple. Now, a lot of these white boys and a lot of these white people, they've already chosen their side. Okay. And what I'm saying to these people is, my people, is you're setting yourself up to get slaughtered. There is hidden powers who are controlling the narrative, and they're brainwashing you to feel a certain way about the system, about white people, about every race, and about yourselves. Do not let these beasts, do not let these evil people do this. And I'm not talking about any particular race, man. You got Black people, man. Like I said, the movement has been compromised. There is no black RBG movement. BLM has always, and from the very beginning, was being promoted and being paid for by Soros and Clinton. If you think that these people who've never given a damn about you, all of a sudden, they care about the black man's plight. So this is all to get as many numbers as they can on their side to fight this civil war that they're planning out, that they're already being prepared for. This is all a big setup. It's huge propaganda. We got to put the race thing to the side right now. The Democratic Party are using black people to fight their war with Antifa, with it's getting very, very deep. If you don't know who Antifa is, look Antifa up. Basically a terrorist group. I don't know what people's belief system is. You can call them what you want to call them.
All right. So they are stirring up a civil war. They are trying to manipulate Americans of all colors, creeds, melanin content levels into believing that we need to have a civil war. Okay, this is very, very deliberate. And actually, this propaganda is working. Okay, Business Insider actually had a poll back in October of 2020 showing that most Americans believed the United States was already in a cold civil war. And NPR reported on this. The University of Virginia's Center for Politics gave out a poll, and it also showed that most people who voted for Trump believed that their state should secede from the Union. That same data showed that 41% of Biden supporters thought it might be a good time to split the country. Okay, NPR was reporting all this. We're getting all kinds of this propaganda, folks. Daryl West, he's with the Director of Governance Studies at the Brookings Institution, and William Gale, Senior Fellow in Economic Studies, also at the Brookings Institution. Brookings Institution is a key deep state front group. Their lower level senior fellow minions probably they're not really connected to the actual deep state, but they certainly do their work. And they're arguing pretty openly that America is headed for a civil war. In this NPR article, they quote some of this work from these two. And they say that, direct quote, today's toxic atmosphere makes it difficult to negotiate on important issues, which makes people angry with the federal government and has helped create a winner-take-all approach to politics. Okay, when the stakes are so high, people are willing to consider extraordinary means to achieve their objectives. And they go on to talk about these extraordinary means. They're saying America has an extraordinary number of guns and private militias, right? Wow, 400-something million guns in private hands. And they say these semi-automatic weapons are like 20 million of the total, making for a highly armed population with dangerous capabilities. And they are correct, right? I believe this is being deliberately engineered, folks. We've talked about the Marxist strategy, the Hegelian dialectic, where you have the antithesis and the thesis, and what you really want is the synthesis, so you control both sides, conflict, and presto, you end up with the synthesis. I believe that's what's happening here. And NPR goes on to point out the most meaningful geographic separation in our society is no longer as tight as north, south, east, west. It is what? Urban and rural, right? Or metro versus non-metro. And then they go on to, the white conservative Republicans and the multi-ethnic liberal Democrats, right? Which of course is a lie. It's all part of their narrative, but that's what they want. The Financial Times also had a very interesting article. This came out in 2022. It's a review of 3 major books by establishment hacks promoting this idea that a civil war is coming. Is America headed for civil war? And they say in the intro, a clutch of books makes an alarmingly persuasive case that warning lights are flashing redder than at any point since 1861. The books they cite are this one by Barbara Walter, How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. Again, you just saw her earlier saying we're close to civil war. White Christian Americans are the ones who are going to do it. Then they've got another one, this one by Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns. It's called This Will Not Pass, Trump, Biden, and the Battle for America's Future. And then the third book, The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future by Stephen Marche, or Marsh, or however you say his name. So this is a major narrative that's being pushed out by the establishment. It was all over the place in 2020, 22. And here's what they said in this Financial Times piece. Even before Trump won the 2016 election, political analysts were warning about the erosion of democracy, the drift toward autocracy, the paralyzing divisions caused by Trump's failed putsch of January 6th, right? January 6th, that's a big part in this fake Civil War narrative, sent America into dangerous territory, right? Polls show Republicans believe, without evidence, they have to throw in there, which is totally ridiculously false, that the election was stolen by Democrats backed by the so-called deep state, the Chinese government, rigged Venezuelan voting machines, etc. And then they point out that in these books, they're making the argument that we're headed to a civil war. One of these books, according to Financial Times, actually quotes a senior Democrat, Joe Biden, telling a senior Democrat, "I certainly hope my presidency works out. If it doesn't, I'm not sure we're going to have a country." Well, no big deal, right? No country. Folks, this is why this is being engineered. They don't want there to be an America anymore, and they would much rather see us collapse in on ourselves. They can write in the history books, see, they tried that crazy freedom thing. They tried that God-given rights thing. They tried this, Christian nation thing. They tried this gun rights thing, and look what happened. It descended into a smoldering pile of rubble, very much like what they did in Libya, Syria, etc. And here they continue with the narrative, right? Republicans are white, small town, and rural. Yeah, there you go again, right? And then they go on to say Democrats are now urban and multi-ethnic. Total lie, by the way, absolute lie, right? Tons of Hispanics, tons of Americans of African ancestry have come to the Republican Party. And most of the leaders of the Democrat Party are lily white, if you want to use that terminology, right? Of course, the Bible never talks about race. I believe it's a false construct created to divide human beings. But they say that in this article that we have a fractionalized anocracy halfway between autocracy and democracy, and that it's quickly approaching the open insurgency stage. Violence stalks America's political language, okay? They say this Stephen Marsh, he writes in this next Civil War thing, he says that America is one spectacular act of violence away from a national crisis. And it's true. We'll talk about that. They say the number of right-wing militias is exploding. White supremacist sentiment is now in law enforcement agencies. Oh, my goodness. They say the number of potential armed insurgents. You got left insurgents group, Black Panthers, etc., that caused a panic in the 1970s. So what would a 21st century U.S. Civil War look like? Well, nothing like the first time. Again, they get back to this really ridiculous narrative that they're pushing. Right? They say that these insurgents will slip in and out of the shadows, communicating on message boards and encrypted networks. They'll meet in small groups in vacuum repair shops and along retail strips, in desert clearings along Arizona's border, in public parks in Southern California, or in the snowy woods of Michigan, where they will train to fight. Oh, it sounds so terrifying, right? Even the foreign propaganda press is pushing this, right? Here's the UK fake Guardian. Is the U.S. headed for a second civil war? And again, the polls have been steadily moving in this direction, right? In 2018, Rasmussen had this poll that said 31% of likely voters thought the U.S. would have a second civil war sometime in the next 5 years. 11% thought it was very likely. 59% said it was unlikely, but only 29% said it was not likely at all. Interesting, right? Very interesting. So, folks, what we have to be concerned about right now, I believe, is efforts to stir up this hatred. Right? They want you to think that the enemy is your neighbor. It's the Democrat. It's the people down the street. It's the city dwellers in New York, or the country people out in Nebraska and Kansas, right? Those people are not your enemy, okay? They may have different political views. They may have been brainwashed in a public school. They may be drinking too much propaganda from the sewer that is the Communist News Network, better known as CNN. But these people are misinformed. If they knew what was going on, they would not be thinking that you are the problem. I think what we really need to be concerned about is the possibility of fake, false flag, or orchestrated terrorism, or some useful idiot being whipped up into a frenzy and then going off and doing something stupid that then the media would magnify. Now, the Human Rights Watch actually did a really interesting study, and they found that almost every high-profile domestic terror case across America since the September 11th attack featured the direct involvement of government agents or informants. In some cases, they say, virtually the entire terrorism plot from start to finish was actually led and financed by government operatives, okay? We saw this recently in Michigan. Yeah, they finally got a conviction of one or two of these boneheads. But if you look, a lot of these people were actually released by the jury because what they said was this was not a terror plot. This was a bunch of clownish FBI goons convincing a bunch of doofuses to say stupid things on a wire. Okay. The government has a long history of trying to plan false flag terrorist attacks. Of course, we have Operation Northwoods, where the Department of Defense, this was 50, 60 years ago, they were going to use terror attacks against targets here in the United States or foreign targets. One scenario they envisioned was shooting down, and by the way, we have the documents about this, folks. John F. Kennedy refused to sign off, but they talked about shooting down an airliner. They talked about bombing my hometown of Miami. They talked about sinking a boat full of refugees. And here is part of the document. They say the desired resultant from the execution of this plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash and irresponsible government to develop an international image of a threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere, right? So that we could start a war. There was another one, CIA Operation Mongoose. Again, we have declassified documents on this. They talked about developing a fake terror campaign in Miami or in Washington. They talked about sinking a boatload of Cubans. They talked about all kinds of, blowing up bombs, publicizing it, arresting Cuban agents, and then releasing fake documents showing that this was an attack. Folks, this is incredibly significant. And if you don't understand this history, you are ripe for being deceived. So, be very, very careful. I believe that the establishment wants us to have a civil war. I believe that they want to see Americans killing each other. They want Americans to turn on each other, right? Jesus said it very, very clearly in the Bible. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. In fact, in one verse, he says, a kingdom divided against itself will be laid waste, will be brought to desolation. They need Americans divided. They need Americans to think that it's Democrats or it's Republicans or it's black people or it's white people or it's Catholic people or it's Jewish people or whatever, to avoid us uniting around the principles that our nation was founded on, the idea that God created us, the idea that God gave us rights, the idea that the purpose of government is to punish violations of these rights, murder, thievery, etc. Right? It's a trap, folks. It is an absolute trap. Now, in this, one side may look like a side that you agree with more, right? It may look patriotic and Christian, or if you're a left-winger, it may look, revolutionary and anti-capitalist, whatever, right? They need people to believe that this is legit, that this is a good idea, and so they will try to manipulate people into falling in one side or the other, right? They'll tell black people that they're under attack by white people. They'll tell white people that they're under attack by black. I mean, all kinds of madness. And folks, we need to be very, very careful. Okay. I believe that they are laying the groundwork. And if you go look at the propaganda for a civil war, I mean, it's just almost endless, the number of examples that you can find, right? I want to read just a few of these headlines here, right? So here's in the Cap Times, my New Year's resolution, save America from civil war. Right here, you've got in 92ny.org, 2 years after insurrection, a conversation with Dr. Barbara Walther and Farai Chideya. Here's Business Insider. Want to prevent a civil war? Regulate social media algorithms. Oh, okay, that's cute. Right here is Brookings EDU. I mentioned these guys, William Gale and Darrell West. Is the U.S. headed for another civil war? September of 2021. Here's a BU Today. BU Historian Answers. Are we headed for another civil war? Okay. Right here is the New York Magazine, New York Intelligencer. How close is the U.S. to civil war? About 2/3 of the way, Americans say. All right. So, folks, they are not messing around here. They are grooming us for this. And we need to be very careful not to fall in the deep state trap. Your fellow American is not your enemy. Okay, the deep state is trying to destroy our country, enslave our children, and build a totalitarian one world order. And they need us turned against each other to be able to accomplish that. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for watching. This is Behind the Deep State. I'm your host, Alex Newman, senior editor of the New American Magazine. Hopefully you can join us next week. Until then, God bless you all.
They say I'm part of a global plan. I don't think so. It's too hot. It's too cold. You know what? The weather changes.
Here's the news, Dad.
Nope. It's hard to tell what's real and what's fake these days.
Ditch the fake news and always get the truth. Go to thenewamerican.com.